There's something almost hard to imagine today. But not all that long ago, the marathon wasn't a bucket list achievement. It wasn't a global event drawing tens of thousands of runners. It was in many ways just kind of a fringe pursuit. In the early 1970s, distance running in America was still a niche world, tucked away on college tracks and in small under the radar road races. But over the course of a single decade, that changed dramatically. Running didn't just grow, it exploded into a cultural movement. At the center of that transformation were a handful of remarkable athletes whose stories stretched far beyond the finish line. We're talking about figures like Steve Prefontaine, the rebellious Oregon phenomenon who ran not just to win, but to challenge the system. Frank Shorter, whose gold medal at the 1972 Olympics helped ignite a national obsession. And pioneers like Joan Benoit and Grete Waitz, who pushed past deeply entrenched barriers to redefine what women could do in endurance sports. Their rise came at a pivotal moment in American history, a time shaped by the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the disillusionment of Watergate scandal, when many Americans were searching for something grounding, something personal, something real. And for millions, running became exactly that. That story is captured in a compelling new book, The Long Run, which traces the decade that made marathon running not just popular, but powerful, blending sports, culture, and biography into a narrative about identity, endurance, and change. Joining me today is the author behind that story, Martin Dugard, a New York Times best-selling historian and storyteller known for bringing the past vividly to life through known works that connect individual lives to larger historical currents. A quick word from our sponsors. Martin, welcome to History Shorts.
Yeah, nice to be here, Pete.
I know it's the third time. I'm hoping you're going to continue. So I should be, one day maybe I'll say, this is the ninth time Martin Dugard is back.
I'm all sign me up. Sign me up.
That's awesome. So this book, I feel like, has been a long time in the making, right? I mean, you're combining two of your life's passions. How does that feel? How did you come about making this book? And was this something you always wanted to write?
It really wasn't something I always wanted to write, but as I began to write it, I knew that I'm the perfect guy to write this book. I mean, everything that's in the book, I lived it. I knew most of the history without having to do a lot of research. But the great thing about the research was I unearthed things that I never knew, that, a couple myths that we busted a little bit. But I had a great time writing because it turned out to be a very personal book. And one of the highest compliments I got was somebody said, it doesn't read like a history book. It reads like two buddies out for a long run on a Sunday morning, just having a conversation and, having a few laughs, and just talking shop. So I feel like that helps it move faster. I mean, it's certainly not a dry, boring history. And it's really, I say it's a book about a revolution because it's a movement that changed everything about modern American life.
So this is more of a social history, which you're more known for your like traditional big scope historical, military perhaps, or political topics. How does that change the approach to this book?
It doesn't really change anything. It's an historical topic. I mean, my first book ever was written. Like my first history book was Captain Cook, and I think that was about 2000. And I knew nothing about nautical history at the time. So I approached that book like I approached this book, which is I just do the deep dive on the research, and I find the story, and I kind of flesh the story out. And so that applies to writing about George Patton. It applies to writing about the Battle of Midway. It applies to anything. It's like you find the story, you tell the story, and you try to make it rise up and be substantial enough through the research that the reader really connects with the topic.
So you're inspired by running itself, by the a very act of running. How did the research about the history of marathons and running, how do you think that added or perhaps challenged what you feel about running?
It's kind of like parallel. things because, I'm also a high school cross country and track coach, and I've been doing that for about 20 plus years. And so I've seen running from a lot of different points of view. So to combine, my own experience as a runner and a marathoner with my coaching, and then add the historical element, they kind of all wove together as I told the story. So it feels a little. It's definitely more personal than, for instance, writing about the Battle of the Bulge. It's just one of those things where, I wasn't there for, obviously World War II, but because I was part of this running revolution, and because I've been a runner so long, all of this felt very organic to me. Something that I was deeply familiar with.
And you kind of touched upon this at the beginning, but this book is not pure history. It's also not a memoir or like this idea of like this love letter to a sport, but it's actually all of those things, right? So as you're writing this, can you kind of elaborate? Was there a plan of, or did you catch yourself? Oh, it's becoming too memoir, or it's becoming this, and or were you just having fun with it? And is that why it's so fun to read?
Yeah, the memoir. See, running books tend to be either how-to or personal memoir, and I didn't want to do either one of those, and I also didn't want to tell just a straight history because, again, I had an emotional, personal tie to it. But throughout the book, I would show chapters to my editor and I would say, "Is there too much Marty in there? Should we pull it back?" And she told me, she goes, "No, let's I'll tell you if it's too much." And she gave me a little bit of rope there, and I think it really helped. And the ending of the book is very much informed by that personal experience.
Oh, absolutely, especially the last lines. Yes. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but let's talk about the revolution aspect, right? Because you said it in the beginning that this book is very much kind of about the revolution of the sport, right? With regards to the marathon. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, people talk a lot about the running boom, and I've never liked that term. And when my editor suggested that I write about the running boom, I was like, ah, I don't want to write that book, you know. And then, but when I realized all the changes that came place, I mean, let's say the early 1960s, we were a nation that did not embrace exercise or fitness in a large way. We were a nation that liked our conveniences. That was considered progress. The fact that we had modern conveniences that would allow us to, spend a lot more time relaxing and, you know, having a stiff bourbon and smoking a cigarette and just taking it easy. And people even believed back then that if you exercised, you would exceed the number of heartbeats that you were granted for your lifetime, and you would at some point just drop dead. And the running, let's not call it the boom, the running revolution of the 1970s, which continues to this day. I mean, the book goes all the way up to 2026, changed all that. It all of a sudden we became a nation of people that started to think about what we were eating. We changed the way we dressed. Much more fitness oriented clothing. Um, Running shoes became even fashionable as leisure footwear. When developers develop subdivisions now, they put in trails between houses so people can run and hike, which is something that would have been unheard of 50 years ago. So learning all that and trying to find a way to put it into the book in a very fun way, so it doesn't feel like I'm spoon feeding people doses of boredom in the name of history was a great challenge, and I think I succeeded.
I remember like adding this like historical anecdote to it, but there's a scene about Kennedy kind of sparking this a little bit, right? And telling Americans more or less like we need to get a little healthier, correct?
Yeah, definitely. And the weird thing was, I mean, now we know in retrospect that Kennedy was physically a complete mess, but he had this public image. I mean, he was a youthful president, the youngest, and so he exuded energy. And we saw the Kennedy family playing flag football, and he was the guy who swam through Japanese waters to save a buddy after the PT 109 accident. So he actively wrote a story in Sports Illustrated, an op-ed piece, saying basically we're a soft nation and we need to do better. We need to start exercising. We're not ready to go to war with the Soviets or the Chinese. And it caught fire. I mean, if you look at what Kennedy did in his very short term in office, he changed completely the way that people thought about exercise.
Absolutely. You also mix a lot of just anecdotal history in here and fidepides, which we start the story with, but also the bigger historical context of the 70s and how these two things play off each other. This revolution, I'm not going to say boom, right, of marathon running and running period as a sport. How does that interact with the context of the 1970s? How do they influence one another?
It's weird because when I began writing it, I didn't see the juxtaposition. I just and I wasn't going to reach for that. I wasn't going to contrive ways to tie the running revolution in with all the things that were happening in the 1970s. But it it really there was a lot to it, and actually it starts back in the 60s with the jogging thing started by Bill Bowerman in 1967, and that was just the height of the Vietnam War, a lot of stuff going on in this country, and but as I wrote the book and I and I followed this transition from runners back in the 60s and 70s were just early 70s were just a bunch of nerds. It was a very minor part of the population that was not chic or cool. It was just a bunch of zealots out there, running around in their underwear, and but that sense of individuality and that sense of personal freedom really came to the fore as Vietnam wound down and we as a nation began a transition into that post-Vietnam civilization.
So let's talk about your main characters, right? Your protagonists that kind of are the center of this story. Did you always know it was going to be these four, or did you have someone on the fringes that just like didn't quite make it?
Yeah, it's that. And first of all four of these people, that's the centerpiece of the book is they're really iconic, larger than life people, and that's every history book needs those people. Again, you need your George Pattons to make the story really tell itself. And so I've got Steve Prefontaine, who again, runners were nerds. Then Pre comes along. He's got long hair. He's got a porn star mustache. He's brash and arrogant. He likes women. He likes to drink. That's not what people used to think of runners as being. So he made it that approachable. Frank Shorter, the same thing, a little bit more introverted, but definitely an iconic character. His 1972 Olympic marathon victory was the first time the Olympic marathon had ever been shown, on television in its entirety. And a whole nation, people were transfixed by the sight of Shorter breaking away and winning the marathon in Munich. And that really, for a lot of people, that's the day that a lot of people became aware of what a marathon was. Grete Waitz, 1978, wins the New York City Marathon and upends the ideal that women really couldn't compete with the men because she beat almost every guy in the race that day. And then she came back the next year and did even better. So, and then Joan Benoit Samuelson wins the 1984 Women's Olympic Marathon, the first in history. This very diminutive, very stoic individual who just made a very brash move early in the race, dropped all the competition, including Grete Waitz, and went on to win. And a lot of people will tell you that they knew where they were when Shorter won in 72, and that they knew where they were when Samuelson won in 1984.
So who was on the fringe?
Oh, Bill Rogers. I'm sorry, Bill. So Bill Rogers, easily one of the greatest marathoners in history. He won New York 4 times. He won Boston a number of times. Um, and he like we have four people on the cover, and I said, what about Rogers? And they said, we don't have room for for Rogers. And and I and I and I argued with myself about that because he definitely was influential. There were a number of people immediately after him that don't even get mentioned in the book, just because I was trying to keep it focused on a different angle about all this. In the end, though, I decided that as great as Rogers was, he came back. He made a comeback. Like he watched Shorter's 1972 marathon while smoking Winston cigarettes because he'd given up on running. So I kind of thought Shorter inspired Rogers. Rogers was great, but it was Shorter who gave him the kick in the pants to get back into running. So sorry, Bill, you're not on the cover.
So if you are given a chance, your publisher comes up to you and says, "You know what? This book's as big of a hit as we knew it was going to be. We want to do a book about one of these characters in more depth. Who would you want to return to? And who do you find to be not tiring, but you're like, I don't know if I could go back there?
I don't want to do a biography. That's the thing, is I wouldn't want to write about anybody. I kind of feel like once you've explored the broader picture, to go back to just one individual is confining. And I've written biographies before, and I find them to be really cramped. And so, what I'd like to do is find another. I would like to do another running book, and I'd like to find another way to look at this broader picture of, for instance, the current revolution in running, which running is bigger than ever right now. 1.1 million people applied to run the London Marathon, which takes place this coming Sunday. So I'd like to find the story there, and then find the characters within that story and blow those people up, and find four new people for the cover.
This could be like your new series, right?
you know, I feel. I mean, I've written 30 odd books, and I think I've looked at history through a different prism on a number of occasions, and I feel like this book has given me a lot of leeway now that I've done, as you accurately said, a social history. It gives me a lot of leeway to kind of find an exciting new way to tell history, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, like I said, this book mixes history so well with so many different aspects. Um, so let's talk about, let's start. I mean, I have a few, but I'm just going to cover one. Let's do Steve Prefontaine. Never won an Olympic medal, gold medal, I should say, or Olympic medal.
Yeah.
But it's considered kind of like a James Dean of the sport, right? And I think that might have something to do with the fact that he was, very legendary, a bigger than life persona, but also died young. Do you think had he not died young and he continued running, he would still be as big of an icon for this sport as he is today?
You know, I don't think so. There's a lot to be said for dying young. Who knows? Think about James Dean. What kind of actor would he have been going on? I think if Pre had lived, he died in 1975. If he had lived, I think he would have medaled at the Montreal Olympics, 1976. I think he would have moved up to the marathon for 1980, which is when we boycotted in Moscow. But I still think he would have only been 33 in time for 1984 in Los Angeles. And I think he definitely would have been a marathoner by then. And I think his celebrity would have been more established. I've actually had people say to me, well, Pre's not a real runner because he never ran a marathon, which is utter horseshit. He's a great runner by anyone's standards. But I think there's the reason that I see high school kids wearing Steve Prefontaine t-shirts, quoting Steve Prefontaine, saying that they want to run like Pre, which means you run from the front and you dare anybody to come with you. I think a lot of that is because of that mystique that happens when you die young and tragically, with your potential not really realized.
I also really like the fact that these are quote unquote normal people. You know what I mean? Like people that come from different walks of life. And I think that's what it is about the sport, that you don't have to be a professional athlete to pick up this particular sport, which I think makes it appealing.
I think that is the everyman beauty of the sport. And running is a very individual thing. Like every runner has a different experience with every run that they do. And even if, you have 60,000 people run the New York City Marathon, you have 60,000 unique stories about what happened on that day. And I think one of the reasons that this whole running thing became a big deal is because of that individual aspect. I mean, people could watch Steve Prefontaine on television in the 5,000 meters at Munich. A lot of people didn't say I can run as fast as him, but if I train and if I really struggle, I think I can do the marathon. I can personally go 26 miles, and that's the challenge. I mean, yesterday at the Boston Marathon, the winner went 2:01, which is crazy fast. There were three guys under 2:03, so we're talking about 4:45 per mile for 26 miles. But there were 30,000 other people who finished the race who went at their own pace, had their own struggles. The marathon is ascendant and is going to be this way for a long time to come.
And I love the fact that in your book you kind of show this fact that when the New York Marathon was first a thing, it was like running around a park, really. You know what I mean? Like 100 some people, right? one woman, $1 to get in, and it really is a revolution. How far it has come since that moment.
Well, think about it. 127 people started the 1970 New York City Marathon. The Boston Marathon had been around since 1897. So, but it was a big deal to to have one in New York, or you would think it would be a big deal. Nobody knew what was going on. You just saw 127 people doing loops around Central Park. Only 55 finished. The winner got a trophy and then took his wife and kids home. It wasn't like there was this big, TV celebration or anything like that. And then you like I said, flash forward from that, 55 finishers. At the New York City Marathon last year, when 60,000 people finished, you had 55 people finishing every minute. I mean, once you got into the middle of the pack. So that is just an explosion in popularity. And it really shows that, like I said, that everyman quality of the sport, that it appeals to everybody. It's been called the suburban Everest because it's on so many bucket lists. And that's a pretty cool thing.
If you could have your readers take one idea away from the long run, what do you hope for that idea to be?
Um, I think we live our lives in a state of routine and mediocrity, and I think we have very few chances in life to do something superhuman or special or quote unquote Olympian, and that's what people should take away from it. Is running is an attempt to kind of banish that mediocrity for 20 minutes or an hour or 3 or 4 hours, and what I want people to realize is to read the book that this is not my story; it's their story too. And I hope that in my words they can find the courage and the inspiration to do something special.
Martin, last question for you. I mean, obviously, this is a personal book because you're a runner, you're a coach, you're a historian. It all kind of mixes together. But if you were to do something very similar with a different sport, just for funsies, even if you were to do it as like just an article, right? Can you think of another sport where you would be like, I could pick some people out and to show how they influenced, a snapshot in time? Can you think of one?
I've always wanted to do a baseball book, and not because I'm a big baseball guy. I mean, I follow baseball, but I find that because you have so many games and because the season is has so many ups and downs, I feel like there is a very rich story to be told. And a number of historians have already done stuff, and I'd like to find something unique. So yeah, maybe baseball.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was an awesome interview. I appreciate it.
Peter, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to coming back for number 4.